Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, April 26th. And tonight, we begin with a stark warning from Russia's top diplomat, who has cautioned Ukraine against provoking World War III. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the threat of a nuclear conflict should not be underestimated. He made the comments yesterday as his country unleashed attacks against rail and fuel installations far from the front lines of Moscow's new eastern offensive. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly met today about the pushback against Russia's invasion. This was during a video call with her American counterpart, Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Meanwhile, the list of arms flowing into Ukraine is long and growing even longer, including the most modern American and Canadian artillery. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin convened a meeting of defense ministers and top military leaders from about 40 countries at Germany's Ramstein Air Base today. Canadian Defense Minister Anita Anand says Canada will continue to send weapons from the inventory of the Canadian Armed Forces, and it is entering into contracts with defense suppliers for more weaponry. Mr. Austin told reporters that the goal is not just to support Ukrainian defenses, but to help them prevail against a larger invading force. Back here at home, Environment Commissioner Jerry DeMarco says carbon pricing is essential if Canada is to finally succeed in significantly reducing its greenhouse gas emissions. He released his 5 reports on carbon pricing today, transitioning workers away from fossil fuel industries, hydrogen energy, climate-related infrastructure policies, and government efforts to cut its own emissions. Mr. DeMarco says the current carbon pricing system is disproportionately hard on Indigenous communities and small businesses, and not hard enough on the biggest emitters. In the nation's capital, Ottawa's interim police chief isn't taking any chances that a motorcycle convoy set to roll into the city on Friday will set up a protest like the one that occupied the downtown in February. The Rolling Thunder Ottawa convoy is scheduled to have a rally and after-party on Parliament Hill on Friday. This will be followed by a ride through the streets of downtown Ottawa on Saturday. The group has not been clear about the cause it is rallying for, except to say that members want to peacefully celebrate their freedom. All right, turning to a new report published on the weekend that shows record levels of anti-Semitism were recorded in Canada last year. The annual audit by Jewish advocacy group B'nai B'rith found there were about 2,800 anti-Jewish hate crimes. This includes beatings, vandalism of synagogues, and swastikas in schools. Quebec and British Columbia recorded the sharpest increases. An uptick in air travel will be all the more important for Air Canada, which lost $974 million in its first quarter. Now, that's an improvement over the $1.3 billion loss it reported in the same quarter last year. Revenue more than tripled to $2.57 billion. And CEO Michael Rousseau says the year began with weaknesses due to pandemic travel restrictions, but the results are clear evidence that a recovery is underway. On the West Coast, the BC Ministry of Agriculture is working closely with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and poultry producers. This comes after a small backyard poultry flock in Kelowna tested positive for avian flu. It is the second reported outbreak in flocks in the province. The infected Kelowna flock has been quarantined, and producers within a 12-kilometer radius have been notified. The Royal Bank and CIBC want in on Elon Musk's deal with Twitter. They are 2 of the 12 banks offering the Tesla CEO financing for his bid to buy Twitter. The social media platform's board has accepted Mr. Musk's $44 billion U.S. takeover bid and immediately tweeted that he plans to make Twitter better than ever. He says he will make the algorithms open source to increase trust, defeat the spam bots, and authenticate all humans. Moving to the 3-day tour Prince Charles and his wife Camilla will make next month. A detailed itinerary has been released, and it indicates that they will start off their visit in St. John's on the 17th with a trip to a fishing village and a visit to a garden that honors Indigenous residential school survivors and victims. The next day will feature meetings with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Governor-General Mary Simon in Ottawa. Canadian Jeopardy star Matea Roach held on to her hot streak last night, which is the 8th longest in the American game show's history. The 23-year-old Toronto tutor who grew up in Halifax won her 15th game in a row last night and boosted her winnings total to over $352,000 US. She's already earned a spot in the show's Tournament of Champions, which is set to air in the fall. Up next, we take a look at the implications of Elon Musk's Twitter takeover, so stay tuned. We'll be right back here on Forum Daily News. Tesla billionaire Elon Musk has successfully arranged to buy Twitter for about $44 billion US. His stated aim is to turn it into a haven for free speech. But the social platform has been down this road before, and it didn't end well last time. While Mr. Musk's pitch may sound straightforward, neither tech giants nor entrepreneurs have managed to make a free-for-all digital meeting ground work in practice. In past flirtations with light-touch moderation, harassment and misinformation have overwhelmed many, driving away users, advertisers, or both. Well, joining us now to give us an idea of what exactly this acquisition means for the future of Twitter is Dr. Kristen Martin, professor of technology ethics at the University of Notre Dame. She joins us from Indiana. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Mr. Musk says he wants to turn Twitter into a platform for free speech. So what policies did Twitter have to prevent what Mr. Musk describes as free speech?
So I think what he's referring to are their content moderation policies, decisions that they make as to who is allowed to be on their website, if they're hate speech or misinformation, that someone could be removed from their website or certain content could be removed. And so for him, this level of engagement from Twitter as to who's on their platform is too much, and he calls it a free speech issue. It's not a free speech issue. It's not the government doing anything. But for him, this is curtailing a user too much.
All right. Well, we know this deal still needs regulatory and shareholder approval, but what are you expecting to be Mr. Musk's first moves on the platform following this acquisition?
Well, if we take him at his word, other than the edit button, I think what he's saying is that he does not like the content moderation policies, the policies as to who's allowed to be on the website and who's not. And he wants it to be broader. So fewer blocks, fewer people removed from the website. So we should see more hate speech, the hate groups that might be removed from Twitter that are on other social network sites, more misinformation. So the idea for Elon Musk appears to be that more speech that was previously removed should be let on the website.
Now that's concerning because Twitter has a lot of power, and we saw that during the January 6th insurrection last year following Donald Trump's tweet to incite it. So how would Twitter under this sort of Musk management impact such polarizing voices on social media?
So I think his policies would do two things, and we can see this on other websites that have a lighter touch when it comes to content moderation. One is the spread of misinformation and kind of the off-website effects of that. So the recommending of the insurrection by Facebook or hate groups that form on a website and then manifest off the website. And so we see this in other websites that have a lighter touch with content moderation and allow hate groups to be recommended. So not only remaining on the website, but actually recommended into your feed. And we see the implications for different groups forming, different types of hate content, hate speech on the website. But the second thing that's a little bit ironic when it talks about more voices is that one of the repercussions that the more marginalized voices, so people who are the target of the hate groups, these could be racial or ethnic minorities, these could be gay groups, transgendered groups, women, whoever is the target of these types of groups actually have less likelihood to be on the website because they're going to have their voices silenced. And so having more voices does not necessarily mean more speech. If it's the wrong voices that are bullying, then you actually have less speech on the platform.
Now, that's interesting because Twitter did go down a similar road before. And as we mentioned, because of the issue of misinformation and harassment, it saw a lot of users leave, including advertisers. So do you see something similar happening under the Musk takeover?
I do. Twitter doesn't have as large of a user base to have the muscle that Facebook has when it comes to advertising. For some advertisers, they feel that they can't get off of Facebook because the only way to reach their users is through Facebook. That's not the same with Twitter. People are not using Twitter as the sole source of news or all of their kind of online content. And so advertisers could easily leave Twitter if they don't like the content, if they don't want their advertising for a car or clothes to be right next to a hate group's promotion of hate speech, then they could easily leave the advertising to another platform.
All right, ma'am, just about a quick 30 seconds left here, but how do you see Twitter evolving in the next few years following this acquisition?
Oh, I think, it's a shame because Twitter's really been doing well in all of the social media platforms of trying to, one, be very targeted and responsible about their content moderation. They're not perfect, but you can see them striving to do better and trying to remove hate speech or anything that would actually make the speech less civil on the platform. They've been making great hires in machine learning ethics and their entire group in that area. They, criticize their own work and publicize it. They are really defensive of their own users and trying to protect their anonymity. So in many ways, their social media platform has been what we would strive for in this area. And so I can see this actually taking a turn where they are not rewarded for that type of behavior and in fact, turn the other way.
All right, Dr. Martin, thank you for your time. We'll be right back after a short break. The World Bank says commodity prices that have reached historically elevated levels because of the war in Ukraine will remain high through the end of 2024. The agency's Commodity Markets Outlook report, released today, says energy prices, food and fertilizer have sustained the largest commodity shock since the 1970s. Non-energy prices, including agriculture and metals, are projected to increase almost 20% in 2022. They will then moderate in the following years. The World Bank adds that a prolonged war or additional sanctions on Russia could boost prices even higher and make them more volatile than currently projected. This comes as cooking oil prices continue to rise, adding another pinch to households and businesses around the world. Well, with us now to discuss the implications of these rising food prices is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, Senior Director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Dr. Charlebois, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Well, thank you.
Now, we mentioned prices are rising for food, fertilizer, and fuel, but this isn't really new news amid the war in Ukraine and the pandemic. So has the recent World Bank report highlighted anything new from what experts have been predicting for some time now?
Well, I mean, it's really confirming what we all feared, really. Unfortunately, this is going to drag on for quite some time. Of course, nobody knew exactly how long the conflict would last. We're likely going to miss this year's production cycle with Ukraine and sanctions against Russia. And so that really takes out a lot of products and, of course, fertilizers necessary for farmers to actually grow more food, especially here in North America. So overall, the entire world is really has been destabilized by this conflict, unfortunately. So we started the conflict with this COVID hangover. Supply chains have actually struggled, and that we were expecting that to last maybe 6 months to a year. If you add the Ukraine conflict onto that mess, of course, you're looking at least 2 years, which is exactly what the World Bank is saying today.
And it's interesting that you mentioned fertilizer costs and how they're interconnected with the Canadian agriculture industry. How does that translate to prices in the grocery stores?
Well, so many people wouldn't think about fertilizers when they walk into a grocery store, but it has a huge impact. The more you produce, of course, there's less pressure on markets. And of course, manufacturers can actually buy cheaper ingredients to make the food we all buy every day. The thing that most Canadians don't know is that Canada really contributes to unaffordable fertilizers with both Mosaic and Nutrien working together through Canpotex. And Canpotex really is the agent which represents both companies to get the best price possible. So the system we have in Canada for fertilizers actually inflates fertilizer prices around the world, not just for Europe or Asia, around the world, because the fertilizers we buy in Canada, well, prices are influenced by world markets, and we're part of the world market. So I think this is something we're going to have to tackle at some point as Canadians.
And on top of all of this, we mentioned cooking oil prices have also been rising. So what are the main types of cooking oil implicated, and what are they used for?
So in today's report with the World Bank, they actually did discuss the issue of vegetable oils, which is actually an important issue. We're starting to see countries hedging against what's happening right now. So Indonesia decided to halt exports of palm oil, and that so you may say, well, yes, Nestle and Ferrero Rocher and Mondelez will be impacted by having access to less palm oil, but that's going to put a pressure on all vegetable oils around the world, including olive oil, for example, and other types of oil that is needed to do everything we do, both in food service and food retail. So that's we're expecting more of these decisions to happen in the next while as nations start to, unfortunately, start to protect their own as much as possible against what's happening everywhere.
All right, Doctor, just about 45 seconds left here, but I guess the big question here would be, when can consumers expect some relief from these rising prices?
I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, to be honest. If the current inflationary cycle were a baseball game, we're basically probably starting the second inning right now. So we have a long way to go. And again, going back to, I absolutely agree with today's report coming from the World Bank. We're in this for a while. So look for coupons. Look at your flyers as much as possible to save money.
A long way to go indeed. Dr. Charlebois, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
All right. Bye-bye.
Russia's defense ministry is warning it could strike decision-making centers in Kyiv. This in retaliation for Britain's armed forces minister encouraging Ukraine to use Western weapons to carry out strikes on the Russian territory. James Heapy told Times Radio that it was, quote, not necessarily a problem if Ukraine used British-donated weapons to hit sites on Russian soil. The Russian military so far has avoided striking presidential, government, and military headquarters in Kyiv. Meanwhile, no one has claimed responsibility for two explosions that knocked two powerful antennas that broadcast Russian radio shows out of service. It was in a separatist region of Moldova, near the Ukrainian border. Russia bases about 1,500 troops there. The U.S. has warned that Moscow could launch false flag attacks in nations neighboring Ukraine, this as a pretext for sending in troops. Some concerning news in North Korea, where leader Kim Jong-un has vowed to further bolster and develop his country's nuclear capability at maximum speed. The North's official Korean Central News Agency says Mr. Kim made the remarks during a military parade on Monday night, during which the country displayed its biggest missile. Mr. Kim's speech came as North Korea remains locked in a long-running diplomatic standoff with the U.S. over the North's nuclear program. Cooking oil prices have been rising worldwide since the COVID-19 pandemic began, and Russia's war in Ukraine has set those costs even higher. It's the latest fallout to the global food supply from the war with Ukraine and Russia, which are the world's top exporters of sunflower oil. And it's another rising cost pinching households and businesses as inflation soars. People in some countries are facing limits on how much vegetable oil they can buy at supermarkets. Meantime, U.S. consumer confidence edged lower in April, and the conference board says inflation and the war in Ukraine will continue to eat into sentiment, which may further curb consumer spending throughout this year. The Consumer Confidence Index takes into account consumers' assessments of current conditions and their outlook for the future. The Expectations Index, based on consumers' 6-month outlook for income, business, and labor market conditions, ticked higher this month. All right, to the east, Sri Lanka's government says China does not want to restructure its loans to the island nation, but instead it's discussing making an additional loan to help with repayment of existing debts. A government spokesman said Beijing was balking at restructuring Sri Lanka's debt because it does not want to set that precedent. Sri Lanka is on the brink of bankruptcy with nearly $7 billion in foreign debt due for repayment this year alone. Sri Lanka earlier suspended foreign loan payments pending negotiations with the International Monetary Fund for a loan restructuring plan. All right, moving to a new United Nations report which says disasters are on the rise and can only get worse. In the late 20th century, the world had some 90 to 100 disasters per year. The UN now says disasters ranging from climate change to COVID-19 will jump to about 560 a year by 2030. Ride-hailing and delivery giant Uber has agreed to pay a $19 million U.S. fine in Australia. It was for misleading riders by falsely warning they could be charged a cancellation fee and for inflating estimates of comparable taxi rides. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission says the company's Netherlands subsidiary admitted to breaching Australian consumer law. Uber says it cooperated with the commission and made changes to its platform based on concerns raised by investigators. Uber and the commission say they will jointly ask the federal court to order the fine. A Japanese woman recognized as the world's oldest person has died at the age of 119. Now, this was just months short of her goal of reaching 120. Born on January 2nd, 1903, Kane Tanaka loved playing board games such as Othello, and she had an appetite for chocolate and fizzy drinks. She was certified by Guinness World Records as the oldest living person in 2019, when she was 116. All right, a beloved North Atlantic right whale named Snow Cone has been spotted by scientists in Cape Cod. The Center for Coastal Studies tweeted the sighting on Sunday after Canadian Wildlife Federation scientists said that they were keeping an eye out for her. Snow Cone gave birth to a calf in December while she was entangled in fishing gear. In fact, entanglements are a common fate for the endangered North Atlantic right whale, and scientists are hoping to remove more rope from Snow Cone this summer. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and be sure to follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.